Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us in today's episode of BioWiz podcast, Meet the Weezard. I am Elizabeth, and I am happy to be here today with Laurence Phillips, co-founder and managing partner at Aliro Consulting. Hey, Larry, how are you?
Hi, good morning, Elizabeth.
Thank you so much for being here with us today. And I would like to start by asking you what I'm asking all our guests here. Could you please tell us a bit more about your journey and what led you to where you are today?
Sure. First off, thanks for inviting me. It's really nice to be here. My journey came, how I got started, and this is kind of interesting. I was actually a sales rep in Germany in the very early 90s. And over a period of time, I worked my way up through the organization and ended up in global marketing. And I was in charge of global marketing at a time for HIV within that organization. Now, this was interesting because a lot of people weren't very interested in HIV at the time. And for the organization I was working for, it was a large multinational. They only had one drug, and they weren't quite sure what to do with it at the time. And they weren't really quite sure how to approach HIV. So it was a new area for them. A lot of people didn't want to go down that area because there was so much feedback with the patients, and there was so much different feedback from the other areas that people weren't used to. So there was a lot of, let's say, you couldn't market this like a normal drug. It had to be talked about. There had to be studies that were done. Patients were very involved. Their lives were on the line. And so there was a whole different dynamic that changed the way that I think pharmaceutical industry viewed drugs. And I was fortunate enough to be part of that. It was interesting because it was a very high priority drug within the organization itself. So I had direct access to the CEO. I was taken to government visits. I got to have one of our very first visits actually was with Paul Kagame in Rwanda when he was running for president for the first time. So I got exposed to HIV at a very different sort of level than someone just working in the industry at let's say, a somewhat more conservative job. So I was exposed to the funding, I was exposed to the politics, I was exposed to the science, and I got to work with some of the finest scientists in the world because our company was very interested in developing their drugs further and looking at further products. And that kind of shaped the way that I looked at the industry after that. I inherited as part of that responsibility, a philanthropic program that my company had that prevented the transmission of HIV to children. And I became so interested in that program and became so interested in fostering that program and making it more successful that I eventually left that company. And I joined a small NGO that was working in Tanzania. And they were specialized in actually providing access to the drugs. So you noticed, or I noticed at the time, that when you move from philanthropy, kind of a philanthropic approach of giving things to people, to actually making sure that people can use it, is a totally different way of looking at things. And I didn't realize it at the time, and that helped me to gain that experience. Once I was in country and I saw how things were actually moving, I also noticed that there wasn't a lot of the kinds of diagnostics that you might want to have to be able to get more people onto the drugs. And I had the opportunity to move to a diagnostic company, a molecular diagnostic company. And because I understand something about molecular diagnostics, it was really a fortunate twist. I got to work directly in the area that was working on mother-to-child transmission in diagnostics. So I was able to work on that from an access point of view, from a pharmaceutical point of view, and also from a diagnostics point of view, where I even got to do a little bit of development myself. And that really laid the basis of this consultancy that we put together. It was at Abbott that I met my future business partner, with whom we grounded this consultancy, Fabrice, Gerard. And his background was totally different. He had been hired by Abbott as a consultant. He had spent his entire life in NGOs. So my entire life was actually at some sort of executive function within the pharmaceutical industry at one point or another, with a brief juncture into NGOs, where he had this total public health background. And when we put the consultancy together, that was in 2000, I believe 2018 is when we incorporated officially. It was the first time that we were able to begin to really change things in the way that we could address problems that normally in our old roles within the industry, we couldn't address them in the same way.
Okay, so let's discuss further the services that you are giving at Aliro Consulting today with your partner.
Yeah,
what exactly is it that you do?
It's along these lines. We were, sometimes when you're working in the industry yourself, the short-term objectives outweigh the long-term objectives, and there's lots of reasons for that, but that's very generally the case. And when you remove yourself from that atmosphere, you're able to look a little bit with a much greater breadth at the situation, and you're able to advise in a different manner. One of the things that we wanted to do was to try and steer companies away from the short-term visions that are working in low and middle income countries. We wanted them to have a long-term vision. We wanted them to develop a commitment to staying there and actually helping to develop those markets. And it's not so much about the economic development of the market, where that has a definite upside, but the development of the market directly equates very often with access to drugs and medical services in these countries. And that's what was really important to us. And that was the thing, that kind of the twist that we wanted to put into the consultancy. What we wanted to do is we know that companies want to sell as much as they possibly can, and that's great. That's what they need to do. We want them to service as many people as they possibly can, and that's the difference. And that's the way that we approach this consultancy. So we put our programs together that look at policy shaping, the ways that people can approach access programs, the way that they can piggyback on other successful programs. I was in industry roles for 20 years. My partner was in non-industry roles for 20 years. We have a large connections with people that we've worked through for all those years, people that we've kind of grown up with in this industry. And we use that network, and of course we've expanded that network over time, but we use that network in order to see how we can actually make goods and services that are actually needed reach the people who need them. Mm-hmm. And that's the trick to actually having a successful marketing campaign and a successful entry into any market at all, is to actually make sure you're serving the need. And sometimes in all of the chaos about actually bringing things into country and making sure that all the requirements are met for the various stakeholders who might be interested in sales or numbers or things like that, people lose the sight of that objective, that it's really about a person having access to a service that normally would not have access to that service. And that's the kind of thing that we continue to push with companies. And we've been pretty successful with that. So we've been actually happy that we've been able to expand beyond pharmaceutical companies. We service NGOs, we service funders, we've serviced basically anyone who is a stakeholder in the public health field. And that's the great fun part of the consultancy, to really actually, with good business practices, to be able to change things for people in country.
That's for sure the bottom line here. I have a question for you. I would like to understand what happens when innovation meets global health and want to enter a new market.
It's, we see, normally the guys are concentrating so much on trying to bring their particular solution to the market that they've had very little time to understand where it fits into the context of that market. Depending on the backgrounds that people come from, the innovative backgrounds. For example, if it's a large company with lots and lots of money, they're not faced with the same sorts of problems as a startup company that maybe have one prototype. You're not even sure if you can actually get a sensible manufacturing cost out of that product. And still you want to take part in some large public health program. You see, there's alone there begins to be problems for smaller companies, where the larger companies can just scoot right over those things. It's not an issue for them. But real innovation, as you know, happens in the smaller places. It doesn't actually happen in the larger companies unless they bought it. Now, of course, my old colleagues at the larger companies would all yell at me and say, that's not true. Of course, we innovate. But they also know if I look at them, you know what I'm talking about. There is some innovation, but let's face it, it's really outside. And because innovation is a risk. And risk aversion is kind of a policy in larger companies. And so there's this natural tendency to have the innovative approaches come from the outside of a larger organization. And those guys don't have a lot of time or a lot of money to be able to look to the left or the right of whatever their original goal and objective is. For example, we had a lot of organizations at the very beginning of the HIV stuff that came with particular diagnostic advances that they thought would be suitable for the market. Now, the global market and the global funders had already said that those advances would be great and would be suitable, but had spoken about them those 2 years earlier. Now, as you know, for a developer, 2 years is no time at all. You hear something about 2 years ago and you think, all right, well, in 2 years, I'll have a product on the market. That would be fast. In the global funding world and in the way HIV worked at that time, and this is just an example because all of the public health programs work very similarly. The current funding at that time was for this particular method. That changed by the time this company actually made it to the market. And so once this company was on the market, there was no interest in their product whatsoever, and the company, sad to say, dissolved. That happened to a lot of organizations in this. And part of that reason is because people are chasing grants. And the grants are tied to political objectives, but sometimes the political objectives aren't necessarily going to be withheld, are not necessarily, are not necessarily going to be pursued over a long period of time. And if your development time overlaps with that time that those objectives are being pursued, of course, you run out of money. A lot of organizations have run into that problem. And I think part of that is simply not being able to dive deeply enough into the materials to know and understand how stable the market is, who the real stakeholders are, where the actual need is, and how long that need can be expected to exist. Then there's the other thing is price. Whenever you're dealing with a global health initiative of any sort whatsoever, you're always dealing with a price question. And small manufacturers are terribly disadvantaged when it comes to providing price or providing where it costs, because they simply can't make those volumes. Other than that, those are the things we try to make people aware of and try to help them with. But it does work. Other than saying that it's also horrible, enough people make it to the market and enough innovation does get bought. And there is, it's all very much a question of how you present the innovation, how you understand the need that you're trying to fulfill. That's what we help.
Yeah, and that's for sure crucial to be able to identify in advance the challenges that are waiting for you along the way from the moment you have the idea of the innovation and you want to go through with it. So amongst all your collaborations that you must have amongst the years, do you have any example of great success or great failures that you would like to share with us today?
Well, we had, of course, I'll share the success. We haven't really had a great failure. I think the greatest failure I've had is bidding on projects and not actually getting the project where you thought, that was a good one. And you would have liked to have gotten it. But we are a two-man consultancy, and we work with various people that we help with, that help us, and various subcontractors sometimes. But we get out-competed by guys like McKinsey and all the big guys as well. I don't always think the product is better. And in fact, I think a lot of my customers would agree with that. But on the other hand, it's just the way things go. In terms of success, I just recently had one that's at the end of last year that I'm actually quite proud of. We were working with a large NGO of French origin who's really well known. And they had developed a laboratory system that can be placed basically at very remote places around the world. And they were thinking about doing something different with this laboratory system. In fact, they were thinking about, I think they weren't sure if they should continue development of this system or not. And we went through a long consultancy. We spoke to a lot of different people. We were able, in the end, we were able to save the system. They decided to reinvest and redevelop. And I think for me, it was especially a good feeling because it's a system that can do something really good for a lot of people. It can make a difference. It's not one of, sometimes, you know, some of the products sometimes are just another version of a particular product. This was something that had real implications, not only for the services that it provided, but one of the great things about working in the kinds of places that we work in and the places where we give advice is that very often if you have a successful system or if you have a successful program, other programs want to come to you. You work as a multiplier. And so all of a sudden where you think you're only servicing a small part of a population, your services are always more complete and they're always better and they're always increasing in quality. And that was something that happened here. And I'm personally quite proud of that because that was a great thing to have. So, you know, sometimes you just have a good consultancy and everybody says, hey, it was a great project, but that's one where I know that it will make a difference after I'm not here, and that's great.
Making a difference is here the main motivation.
Yeah. Well, why work if you can't make a difference?
Yeah, completely.
Then I'll grow vegetables.
Exactly. So do you have any main advice that you would like to give to small companies, medium companies that would like to enter the global health market?
I think the main advice to them is before you've designed something that you cannot reverse, talk to people. It's really, really important. We've had people come to us and the company is motivated, the guys are good, everybody knows what to do, and they've just designed the wrong thing and they don't have the money to change it. They don't have the pull within whoever's funding their organization doesn't want to help them change it. And so they're forced to push the same kind of semi-suitable product over a long period of time. And it's really a painful thing. You see it happen a lot. And I think it can be avoided if people take the advice really early and talk to a lot of people. Don't just talk to the ones that tell you things you want to hear. So that I think is the most important thing. Get lots of opinions. It doesn't really cost that much.
It costs more after you.
It certainly does.
Too far.
Yeah. That's the question. I mean, I think if you're very, very serious about where you want to go and what you want to do, then a roadmap is essential. And if there's any part of that, I mean, you're always going to have parts of that map, depending on where you are, just temporally in a project that are hard to ascertain. But as you move forward, you should try to illuminate as many of those foggy areas as you can, because it's really, those are the things that come back and hurt you later in a project. And very often they're just small avoidable changes.
Okay, this is great, Larry. Thank you so much for sharing the advice, for sharing your knowledge, for sharing your story with us.
I thank you very much for having me on, Elizabeth. This was a lot of fun.